Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to our webinar. This webinar is organized by the Centers of International Business Education at Michigan State and Texas A&M Universities as part of our Research Spotlight series. This is our 9th and last webinar this academic year, which marks, by the way, the end of our 2nd year with these webinars. First, I would like to thank you and our esteemed panelists for agreeing to join us for today's webinar. The topic of today's webinar is global marketing in a digitally connected world. And for this webinar, we invited 3 international marketing scholars who will discuss their research addressing contemporary conceptual and methodological issues, best practices in this growing research domain. And this webinar will include short presentations followed by a discussion moderated by the co-hosts. David Griffith and I will be your co-host today. David is the Holly Vanderheider Chair in Business and Professor of Marketing and Associate Director of Research at the Center for International Business Studies at Texas A&M University. And I'm Ahmet. I'm an Associate Professor of International Business and Marketing at Michigan State University, Broad College. And I also serve as the Director of International Business Center, MSU CIBER, here at MSU. First, I would like to introduce you Dr. Hannah Lee. Hannah is an Associate Professor of Marketing and Director of Higgin Kim Asia Business Program at Miami University's Farmer School of Business. And she completed her PhD in Business Administration at the Eli Broad Graduate School of Management at Michigan State University. Then she joined the Miami faculty in July 2014. Her research interests explore the field of marketing strategy and the influence of culture and institutional factors on international marketing strategy. Hannah recently published several papers on issues related to the use of social media with a strong global marketing focus. Our next panelist is Timo Mendler. Timo is a professor of marketing at Toulouse Business School. His research also focuses on contemporary marketing challenges in the context of globalization and digitalization. His work has been published in leading marketing and international business journals, such as JIBS, Journal of International Marketing, and International Marketing Review. And our third panelist is Dr. Fatima Wong from King's Business School. Fatima's research interests include international business strategy, services, and sustainability. Her work was published in several major international marketing and international business journals. Her recent work that is particularly relevant for this panel focused on digital marketing capabilities of international firms and cross-cultural marketing and retail internationalization topics. Now, I will pass the proverbial microphone to David, who will lead the discussions during this panel. Enjoy it.
Thank you, Ahmet. It's wonderful that everyone is here. Thank you so much. Monica with us from Texas A&M CIBERs program is going to be our support staff, and Katie Lane is also on the line here for a little bit. She is the director of our Center for International Business Studies. During the seminar, we want it to be as interactive as possible. We want to hear your questions. Please use the webinar chat or the Q&A feature. For any questions you have to the panelists, I will be holding most of those questions, and we will move to them at the Q&A. With that, I say welcome all, and please let me turn the floor over to Hannah Lee to begin. Dr. Lee,
Great.
Take it away.
Thank you. So let me start sharing my screen here. And we're good?
Excellent.
Okay, so then the technical difficulties of sharing research in a digital world. There you go. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I first want to thank David and also Ahmet for the important work that you're doing for CIBER. I am a fan of these series, and so I was thrilled to be able to share my thoughts with you on the last session or the last webinar for this year. And so I am Hannah Lee. I am an associate professor of marketing and director of Higgin Kim Asia Business Program at Miami University. I'm also on the editorial review board for the Journal of International Marketing. So we got in contact with Timo and Fatima. We tried to think about what would be the best way to provide you with a very extensive, but at the same time, in-depth coverage of global marketing in a digitally connected world. And I'm happy to say, I think we're going to be able to do that today. My role as being the first presenter is going to be sort of taking you on a toe dip into the field. It actually might sound like I'm pushing you into the lake at once, but I promise I'll try my best to do this within the 10 minutes. So I'm just going to start with, I'm going to talk about what we're going to be looking at today in the 10 minutes. I'm just going to briefly provide you sort of an update on what's going on in the current literature of international marketing related to social media as well as digital commerce. Some up and coming topic areas of research that I think is promising. And then finally, I want to share with you some experiences that I've had and with my co-authors that we've had in terms of publishing. What are some theoretical and methodological issues that need consideration when publishing in this area, and then also some tips for best practices. So I first want to start with, very slow, definition of social media. And so for the past 10, 15 years, this definition is the one that has been used most by academics. And it views social media as a group of internet-based applications and that allows for creation, exchange of user-generated content. Great definition, very technical, very technology-centric. So I really like this one that Appel et al. Shared with us through their 2020 sort of review article of the state of social media within marketing. And they say that social media is actually, it is technology-centric, but it's not entirely technological. It's an ecosystem in which diverse, complex set of behaviors, interactions, and exchanges involving various kind of interconnected actors occur. And I really like this definition because it really expands the purview of social media, where scholars in international marketing can contribute to these complex set of behaviors and interactions. International marketing is all about interconnected actors and ecosystems that really go beyond national borders. And so with that, there are many, many articles in the international marketing literature, in the marketing literature in general, and IB literature that sort of sum up the research that has been done in the area in the past decade or so. And so this was back in 2020. And so already it's 3 years have passed. So maybe it's time for another review article. So that's another opportunity for future research to just kind of take stock of where we are at. But it seems like the general topics that are being dealt with in the international marketing literature with social media is, word of mouth, co-creation of value. That's what social media is all about, and that's where marketing is able to contribute. But I do also see that the tension between standardization and adaptation, as well as all of these traditional international marketing theories, are coming into play, but in a very new way. And so as an example, Sheth talks about how segmentation is no longer based on traditional marketing metrics, such as economic or standard of living metrics, but it should be based on social media behavior, because we are continuously seeing this rise of what's called a global village, a pan-national market and virtual communities. And so marketers are having to sort of switch their gears and switching their perspective of what constitutes segmentation, how do we target and efficiently position our global brands in the market. Marketers are now able to identify global niches. And so we're not really limited to a certain country where we have small segments, but connecting all of those transnationally, that enables us to sort of identify these large virtual communities. There's a lot of talk about word of mouth, but interestingly enough, there are no theories or constructs about international word of mouth. And so what goes into word of mouth? How can a international marketing manager who works with many different subsidiaries across national markets, how can they engage in that? How can they effectively manage that process and manage that portfolio of digital opinion leaders? So now we are working with customers as well. And so that's where co-creation of value occurs. And so Sheth mentions that really looking into that cross-cultural creativity on a global basis is where international marketing can contribute. There does seem to be a lack of research in sort of the B2B context. We have to look at organizational structures of how we're going to manage this process. It's also important to look at inter-organizational relationships. How can what we see happening in the B2C context with social media, those can have really big benefits for inter-organizational relationships as well. So what governance structures do we need to have internally, both externally as well? And so there definitely is a gap in the literature that examines the role of social media in a international sales setting as well. Okay. All right. So some of the up and coming topics. I know this is very large. I try to fit as much as I could into there. So maybe this will be something that we could discuss later after all the panelists have spoken. But it seems like transformative marketing is a huge issue. How can we leverage social media that provides a really powerful tool? How can we use that to deal with sort of these exogenous shocks that we've experienced in the last couple of years, such as COVID-19, wars, natural disasters. And I think this is an up and coming topic, and it's really reflected in the Journal of International Marketing special issue call for papers, where they're saying, what type of transformative marketing approaches are available to MNEs in such an era of disruption. So kind of looking at global digital agility, I think, is going to be a great avenue of research. Another area that I'm particularly interested in is societal impact. Social media permeates every aspect of modern society, not just the business world. But we really do need to understand how the use of social media by both the consumers and the companies as well, what sort of externalities do we observe? Are they positive? Are they negative? Can we use it for a better world? So some examples would be crowdsourcing diagnoses for rare diseases, global communication of corporate social responsibility efforts, and also efforts towards combating fake news and sort of mitigating the negative effects of social media that we are observing. Another aspect that we are seeing in businesses, companies are becoming more aware of the effects of utilizing social media. And so how can we as a firm bring more wellness to social networks? So being aware of the societal impact that social media has, I think, is another great avenue for research for international marketing. Kind of related to that, connecting the unconnected. I wasn't able to share a lot of the stats here today, but we're actually seeing a little bit of a plateauing of internet use and social media use. And we can see that it's either because of market saturation in a lot of the advanced or developed countries, but it's also we also observe that because of the sort of unwinding of habits during COVID. And so there definitely is a slowdown in user growth. And so, can we find the solution in emerging markets? The opportunities are endless there. And so UN's stated goal of universal connectivity by 2030 is something that is top of mind across nations. And so I think international marketing the literature has a really good is in a good place where they can contribute to how can we start engaging consumers in emerging markets? How can we get them more connected? And what would be the consequences and what would be sort of the benefits to doing that? So connecting the unconnected is a very unexplored area, but we do have a vast literature on emerging markets. And so I think bringing those two worlds together would be a great way to go. Sort of trickling into the theoretical and methodological issues. there's just so much room currently in the literature of exploring how the traditional IM theories will work in this new context. And so, for example, internationalization of these business firms, the traditional internalization aspect of, sort of a step-by-step approach of the Uppsala model is no longer relevant in a world where everyone's connected and the consumers are engaging in sort of this co-creation process of value. And so what does that mean in sort of this digital age where everyone's contributing? I think a tip for that would be, how do these theories work? Look for some complementary theories and perspectives that can help you explain the phenomenon that we're seeing. So network theories, social exchange theories, what other theories out there will help us explain this new phenomenon and add on to the existing international marketing theories. Broadening the level of analysis is another thing that I am continuing to observe in the literature. And so Kirca et al. Mentioned an ecosystem approach, and that kind of clicks with the definition of what social media is in international marketing. And so really being mindful of the different levels of phenomenon that can occur. So, looking at the micro as well as the macro, and perhaps even the meta approach. So just try to expand the level of analysis, and different research questions might arise. That kind of leads into one of the experiences that my co-author team had was being mindful of ecological and aggregation fallacies. And so there, you don't want to take a relationship that you see at a micro level and assume that it holds at the macro level, and vice versa. So being really mindful of those when you are broadening the levels of analysis is important. That kind of leads into the importance of contextualizing social media phenomenon. Because it is inherently global, it's, there's an opportunity where we could understand the role of country factors and also beyond. Are there any systematic differences based on national culture, institutional factors? So looking at those will be super helpful in understanding sort of the more localized approach. But at the same time, we want to look at, are there any universality of effects? So do we see international marketing theories, these relationships, do they hold at the global level? So again, different levels. I think there's definitely a lot of research that can happen. All right, social media, very, very easy and difficult to get data. There are so many metrics out there, but I think that there's still room for construct development. So look for data at multiple levels. Establishing validity is very, very important. So, for example, if it's social media usage, what are we exactly talking about? Is it how many times you are on social media, how many platforms you are on, how much time you are spending on it. So I think establishing validity is very important because there is so many different metrics. I see a need for triangulation. It's easy to get data, but then there's also value in qualitative research methodologies where you could get a deeper understanding. And so understanding the customer journey, what goes on there. So this is something that can not just be done by looking at secondary data, but really providing that qualitative approach, a grounded theory approach, and seeing what happens at the detailed level. Also, I think there's opportunity for understanding the effects of social media, these digital platforms, and the extended self, right? So a lot of opportunities for qualitative approaches there, as well as experimental approaches. So I think not just literature and social media, but journals are requiring multi-method studies. And so this is not just for international marketing, but a general trend across academics. Some tips related to best practices. Probably the most important tip is timing and speed of knowledge dissemination is really of essence. And so, we run the risk of our study or our paper becoming irrelevant by the time it shows up in the journals. And so you really need to take a very strategic approach to this and say, okay, what is going to be the most speediest way that I can get, this paper out to a large audience? And so sometimes there's going to be trade-offs as to, which journal is going to be the most appropriate, how can I reach the most people? And so when you're considering those things, always know that even at the time you are writing the paper, the data is changing and data is coming in. So timing and speed is super important. Always start with marketing or market-derived research questions. It's going to be easier to gain data access. And so a lot of these data the good stuff are not public. And so we have to get company cooperation with that. So collaboration. And so start with, maybe it starts with a consulting project and just, really think of what is important to practitioners. And so that way it's just easier to highlight relevance and practicality when you are writing the paper. You want to be market derived, but at the same time, as academics, we need to be theory driven. So be ready to defend your choice of constructs. Be ready to start with theory. It should not just be about looking at what the data says. It's okay to explore and look at the data, but I think it's really important that is clarified in the paper that, either this is a theorization paper or are we, do we not know what theory is and we are exploring. So don't pause it. If it is an exploratory study, don't theorize and say, this is what the data came out to be. But, we were purposefully being explorative. So I think it's really important to clarify that. Especially in international marketing research, I think you need to be able to defend your choice of constructs that is related to theory, as well as cultural frameworks. We have many, many cultural frameworks that are available to us. So you need to think about, okay, which one makes the most sense for the phenomenon that we are looking at right now. Demonstrate deep knowledge as well as relevance of the topic area. I'm finding that a lot of the journals are asking for very thorough and almost systematic literature reviews. Another thing that is related to timing. Every time you go through a round, remember to update that table because there's going to be new papers that come out in the time of that 3-month, 6-month time frame where you're working on revising the paper. So remember to update. Interdisciplinary insights are golden. So, don't be afraid to pull from literature in other areas outside of marketing, outside of business. But you need to be prepared to defend the relevance of those theories and literature. Lastly, check for related articles in the target journal. When you are going to that journal, you are going to that journal because it makes the most sense to have that paper be in that outlet. And so you really want to demonstrate to the editor and the review team that, this needs to be at your journal and here is why it's relevant. And so just, do a good job in terms of checking for what has been done in the area, particularly in this journal. And I think that will really demonstrate the strength of your paper and the relevance to that target journal. All right. I think I took more than 10 times, 10 minutes, but thank you. And I will pass this off to Timo.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Greatly appreciated. Fernando, got your question in the chat. I'm going to hold that to the end, please. I've got a number of questions sent directly to me. Add them to the chat, add them to the Q&A, send them to me, send them to everyone, and we'll get them after our third presenter. With that said, Dr. Mandler, take it away.
Very much, David, and thanks, Hannah. The time, 10 minutes is pretty tough, so I'm going to get right to it. My talk will focus exclusively on digital platforms and ecosystems, because this is probably the most impactful business model innovation in recent history. So digital platforms, we're familiar with it, and actually they have already transformed the global economy to quite some extent by disrupting entire industries. So social media platforms, on the one hand, change the way we interact with one another, consume media. Online marketplaces have also revolutionized how we are buying products and services. And sharing economy platforms also change the way we move around and share accommodation or other resources we are underutilizing. So this sounds like a lot of different types of platforms that are distinct, And eventually, when you want to study them, you will also distinguish them. But at the same time, they share the same business model, and therefore they also face the same challenges. So I give you a little bit of background because I cannot assume that everyone really touched onto the literature about digital platforms. So it's really a fundamental shift in how business works. So instead of just taking one position in the value chain in a traditional pipeline business that leads up from the suppliers through the manufacturers to the consumers, platform businesses were completely different. A platform company basically creates and manages a platform that connects platform participants, a bunch of different participants. So on the one side, the supply side, you typically have complementers, meaning individuals or businesses that offer either content or products or services on the platform. And on the other side, consumers, again, these could be individuals or businesses that actually consume this content, products or services. And the fundamental difference now is that the value is not created within the company anymore. The value is created basically between those third parties, the complementers, which put in most of the resources and most of the capabilities when creating or co-creating value with the consumers. So to basically get this party started and keep it running, platforms need to tackle a few challenges. And all of these platforms, no matter what they're focusing on. The first one is basically that they, maybe I first of all say, where's the money coming from? The value is created, but the platform companies are generating this revenue typically through transaction fees, subscription fees, or indirectly through advertisement. So coming to, again, generating this revenue, tackling the challenge of recruiting and retaining consumers and complementers, because platforms only work if those network effects actually can unfold. And as you can see, suddenly we don't have, and Hannah already mentioned the interorganizational relationships, suddenly we have triadic relationships between a platform company, the complementers, and consumers across countries, which makes relationship management much more complex nowadays. You have the issue of monetization, meaning finding a sustainable way actually to monetize a platform. And you have a huge issue with governance, meaning mechanisms that you have to implement to align the interests of all these different actors. So now we have all these challenges, and clearly we as marketing scholars, we should have answers to those aspects. These challenges fall in the realm of marketing. But compared to other disciplines like management, entrepreneurship, or IB, actually the literature on international, on digital platforms is not particularly developed, especially when it comes to an international perspective on digital platforms, as Hannah already pointed nicely out regarding social media related phenomena. So obviously these platforms are only so powerful because they are spanning across borders. And this means that they are exposed to all these different environments that are different in terms of social cultural aspects, political legal aspects, and so on. And what I want to highlight, and is also something interesting to look at in research, is that actually the platforms, because they're so powerful, they have also a huge impact on the environment. So these are recursive effects actually. So I believe that this is actually a blue ocean of research opportunities for anyone who wants to work at this intersection of digital marketing and international marketing. And quite generally, I would recommend to focus on problems, meaning certain detrimental effects or barriers that companies or individuals have to overcome, identify mechanisms, and typically mechanisms in the sense of actionable variables that can be influenced by organizations to mitigate those effects. And the nice thing is, since the literature on digital platforms is more developed in some fields like management, entrepreneurship, you can actually look into those fields for some inspiration in terms of novel concepts that they came up, and also theoretical angles that matter to those business models. The list of possible research questions is long, and we actually published on this website listed below a bunch of questions. I just picked a few, and actually it also nicely aligns with what Hannah suggested, meaning there are some issues that have really societal importance and are these macro or big picture questions. For example, and I jump right to the second point for the sake of time, data privacy and protection concerns, they vary around the world, and companies need to understand these concerns and also how to respond when data-related crises occur. In the context of sharing economy, we have the issue of consumer behavior, misbehavior, meaning how people actually treat the shared resources. And again, this is culturally shaped. And here we need, again, governance mechanisms that prevent this behavior. We have the issue of fake news or misinformation. Again, the speed with which certain types of misinformation will spread in different cultures is likely to vary, and we haven't looked at this much. And we have also mentioned by Hannah some negative externalities, and I subsumize this as societal impact, but it can be at the individual level, let it be social media addiction or even depression as a side effect of these digital platforms and the time we're spending on those platforms. All right, let me highlight just 3 more concrete research ideas or research fields that I find very relevant and timely. And you can see this with some of the impactful research that I'm citing. Customer complaints on social media is here to stay, and there is great research doing this, but they typically rely on certain contexts, meaning certain channels, certain language areas. And they have already looked into, is it a better idea to respond publicly or take the conversation into the private space? Or how much empathy do you actually have to show? How much is expected by customers? And even Dennis Herhausen and colleagues mention in their study that it seems that the effect of empathy might be culturally shaped, and this deserves more research. In terms of online marketplaces, again, there's great research by some colleagues that highlight certain trends, certain new concepts like brand flagship platforms or brand stores in one-party or third-party marketplaces. And this is informed by practice and raises new questions about the optimal configuration of channels, or also how you can actually manage to have control over your brand if you want to participate or benefit from these new channels. In terms of the sharing economy, a phenomenon that I find fascinating and is under research is exploitation, meaning, for example, that service providers and customers defect from a platform together, meaning they take the transactions, the future transactions, offline. And this is clearly something that undermines the entire business model. The platform doesn't benefit from transaction fees anymore, and it needs to find mechanisms to actually provide incentives to the users to keep the transactions on the platform, and the effectiveness of these incentives is likely to vary, again, depending on the context. I'm moving on to theory. So I gave you just a bunch of phenomena that I find interesting. In terms of theory, indeed, platforms have certain specificities that are questioning classic theories. Just as an example, the fact that value is created outside of the company is not really aligned with, as Hannah mentioned, internalization theory and also the resource-based view. The triadic relationships don't really work with the idea of orienting yourself to one customer. Suddenly you have multiple user groups with different needs that you have to satisfy. So there will be asymmetries between in the way you're treating those customer groups. And finally, digital transactions also raise a lot of questions on concepts that in IB and IM we are frequently talking about, whether origin-based effects still matter to the same extent or under what circumstances. Overall, I think in many cases we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Look for existing theories that kind of fit to the phenomenon that you're looking at, but feel free to modify these theories, extend them, and actually these can be decent theoretical contributions that you can sell. only when it comes to really novel phenomena, let it be emerging business practices, you can opt for this theories and use approach, which is more inductive and basically infers from these practices new concepts or new theories. Now, David asked me to be a bit more provocative. So I thought about why we are not seeing a lot of this work at the intersection of digital marketing and international marketing. And I think it has to do with the way we are trained and how we conduct research. So I believe that in international marketing, or for IM scholars, it is more acceptable to look over weakness in the data if this theory is strong, whereas in digital marketing, probably good data compensates for weak theory. In IM, we have a tradition of working primarily with primary data, let it be with a lot of cross-sectional survey data, whereas in digital marketing, you see a higher share of secondary data studies, let it be longitudinal field data. And IM scholars, we love our latent constructs and we love to account for measurement error. But because of the nature of the data in digital marketing studies, often they work with single items, meaning observed manifest variables, and measurement error is not much of a discussion in my experience. In terms of endogeneity, I also see a huge gap between international marketing, where I think we are still lacking a little bit of awareness and identifying these sources of bias and finding suitable correction methods. In digital marketing, it's a must. And as a result of all these traditions, actually in international marketing, you can go a long way with CFA, regression analysis, and structure equation modeling, whereas in digital marketing, they're quicker in adopting more contemporary methods, typically just because they enable them to extract insights from this increasingly rich and complex data that they are usually handling. So this is my conclusion. If you want to do research at this intersection, you want, for example, a digital platform inspired phenomenon, but you want to give it an international spin. As an international marketing researcher, please consider multi-method approaches, especially at top-tier journals. This is more and more expected. So get out of your comfort zone with cross-sectional survey data. Familiarize yourself with new data sources, for example, APIs and web scraping. And I hope there will be some questions in the Q&A later on that we can dive deeper. Be more comfortable with imperfect measures, at least if you're heading for journals that are outside of the IM space, because they will not much care about whether you measured something with 4 or 2 items. At least the risk is a little lower. And you have to start taking endogeneity issues more seriously if you want to publish at this intersection. Digital marketing researchers. The digital space is not homogeneous, and there should be more attention paid to contextual influences. And I think actually it adds a layer to your story. To do that, you have to update and upgrade your understanding of institutional factors. And here I have specifically culture in mind, because in anything outside of IM, you still see the primacy of Hofstede's dimensions of national culture. This should be not the default. David actually also wrote a nice paper on criteria, how to select the right cultural framework. So update your knowledge in this regard. When I look at some of these studies, what I also believe is that digital marketing researchers should remind themselves of the basics of sampling theory when interpreting the results. What does it mean? Twitter is obviously not a random sample of a given national population. And even on Twitter, 10% of all users account for 90% of the posted content. So we have a generalizability issue here. And a US comedian summarized this as Twitter not being the town square, but the Times Square, not particularly generalizable. And finally, embrace insightful primary data, both qualitative and quantitative, if an experiment or a survey is designed properly. It can provide you pieces of evidence that enrich your story. And as a reviewer in those journals, I hope there will be, or editor, there will be a more welcoming attitude over the next years. All right, this is it for now. I hope we can dive deeper into some of these aspects, and I hand the floor to Fatima next.
Thank you so much, Timo. That was wonderful, and I appreciate the provocative element that will stimulate conversation, no doubt. Keep your questions coming. Some are posting them directly to the panelists. Others are coming to everyone. We look forward to handling the Q&A. Timo, if you can stop sharing so that we can move to Dr. Wang's presentation, that would be wonderful. And so, Fatima, I turn it over to you.
Right. Okay. So I thought the two previous presenters, Timo and Hannah, really set the tone for this discussion. So what I'm going to focus on is really from a company perspective, so corporate strategy perspective. What do companies need right now? And some of the things that, well, my title says capabilities and mindset. So that's my pitch of what I think they really need now. The right capabilities and then the right digital mindset. So let's just move on. Okay, so these are the three kind of very quick things I'm going to talk about. The first is on digital marketing capabilities, international business. And then the second thing, a little bit on transparency in autonomous systems. And then finally, I think we shouldn't forget sustainability, which is a big issue nowadays. Okay, so the first thing very quickly, digital marketing capabilities. I did a study on 167 international companies and asked them about their digital marketing capabilities and trying to see whether that affects their performance. And I guess the unique part of the study was that I tried to look at different firm size, so from very small firms to medium-sized firms to large firms to see if there was a difference. And so this is kind of the result that digital marketing capabilities can improve firm performance, and that's more so for larger firms. So that's quite logical, I think, because they've got more resources anyway. But mainly also for firms with very high entrepreneurial orientation. So if you're a firm with high entrepreneurial orientation, you will tend to use these capabilities in a better way. And then with regards to firm size, what I found was that SMEs actually can perform equally, on par with medium-sized enterprises. And even though larger firms have a better performance overall, it's still it's marginally better. So the good thing about digital marketing capabilities, to summarize, is that if you have those capabilities in-house, then you can actually compete in the international market. So what are digital marketing capabilities? The way I framed it was that it was relational. So that kind of goes back to the discussion on everything being an ecosystem. So relational competencies, meaning, how do you use, so a lot of times companies may invest in these, in digital technology, but, how do people inside the firm use it? That's the part about capabilities. So for example, do companies use it for improving their customer and supplier linkages? So the obviously the end consumer or the B2B consumer, and then the upstream suppliers. And what I mean by that is it real time? Is it kind of customized IT? So for example, it's not just the same thing that, being able to customize it for different users is very important. Channel bonding, how do you deal with retailers, for instance, and other channel intermediaries? And then also quite interesting from an international marketing perspective is this market sensing, right? So how can, if you have a lot of information or a lot of data, are you using it to the best of your abilities in terms of sensing what's the next trend? And I think the difficulties companies face is that not only is technology moving very quickly, and in fact, the customer is the one who's really using technology, but companies are actually lagging behind that. And it's not me just saying it, it's the World Development Report on Digital Dividends. If you look it up, UNCTAD, a report on digital dividends in 2016. So it says that companies actually are lagging behind the customers in terms of getting on this digital bandwagon. So yeah, so if I move on because of time issues to kind of the why capabilities is important. This is this is a survey by Russell Reynolds, and it basically asking companies what they felt was missing, or what they felt was the most concerning in the next few years. And if you look at the one with the highest score here is availability of key talent and skills. I think capabilities is something that is also top of mind for a lot of companies. And then the second would be uncertain economic growth, changes in consumer behavior, geopolitical uncertainty, technological change. So that doesn't come like the top. So we do have the technology, but do we have the right capabilities to deal with it? So next, I said I would mention a little bit on transparency. So this is a paper that's under review right now, which I'm working with Carmen Lopez and Shintaro Okazaki from King's and also University of Southampton. So what we found was we decided to do a bibliometric analysis on transparency in AI and autonomous systems. And we found that actually just in a general, if you look at all the papers out there, it's very widely discussed in information systems and in law, for example, GDPR, but there isn't that much in business management. So there's something on privacy, for example. There is a little bit on brand transparency, but overall there isn't as much as what we find in information systems and in law. So again, just to give you an idea of the papers that we looked at, so between 2006 and November 2022. So this, you can see that there's a sharp rise in papers published on transparency. So I think this is something that we can really look into. The results of the bibliometric analysis, a little bit, kind of all of it, a lot of very colorful, if you like, but we basically found the different clusters, 8 clusters, based on our analysis. And it's quite interesting because if you look at trust, for instance, which is here, there are papers which talk about that trust is not a very logical thing. So, consumers may probably trust a system that doesn't trust a system that fails, even though it fails, because they trust it. And or the other way may be that they don't trust it, even though that it works really well because it broke down once. So these things are quite interesting from a marketing or consumer perspective. And if we looked at some of the things that we found was that things like trust or explaining AI, balancing transparency, meaning that how much information is being transparent. If you look at all the terms and conditions, is that being transparent? Not really from a user perspective, right? So how do you balance that transparency in the information you provide consumers? Okay, so trust, explaining AI, balancing transparency, transparency for users. So these themes kind of are all related to the end user, if you like, and how they interpret or how they can use autonomous systems or AI in a way that they feel comfortable with. Then we can see things like biases in AI and ethical frameworks, and this comes a lot from information management literature, such as that, machine learning, the fact that machine creates black boxes, and if you put in a biased information into the machine learning process, then the decisions are also biased. So there's lots of interesting study there. So if you look at that, and then the discriminatory classification and filtering, the fact that we're in a filter bubble, we only see news that is presented to us that we like. So we kind of we only see things that are very similar, if you like. So these are kind of more, we think, technical issues related to how the algorithms work. And then finally, power, legal perspectives, and the right to explanation is more GDPR or legal issues. So anyway, so these are the things that we found in terms of transparency. And then we can think of from a marketing perspective, future research directions, for example, in terms of transparency of product, where does it come from? Pricing, how are you using AI to come up with different pricing for different customers? How does that relate to transparency? So moving on, the final theme, if you like, is sustainability. So this, I'm just going to show some slides on some studies from industry. So I just thought, as the discussion point, we could talk about technology for a just and resilient transition. So this is a study by Capgemini in 2022, which talks about, I'm just going to break it down a little bit, but basically, is your organization measuring emissions from the following sources? And they are, if you look at the green, that's good. So they are measuring things like company facilities, what they purchase, electricity, et cetera. But then things like upstream activities and downstream activities is more difficult. So from international business perspective, that's also quite relevant, I think, that, when you invest in technology, how do you also ensure that you're measuring all this and, keeping track of all the decisions that you're making is being sustainable. Then I think this is my last slide here, which is what companies are doing in terms of investing internally. And I'm sure, as a lot of our companies or organizations are doing, promoting well-being across the organization comes on top in terms of the sustainability initiatives. And then for technology, you have 48% planning in the next 2 years to purchase technology that meets sustainability criteria. So this is, I think, quite low in terms of percentage. And but if we have more research on that, perhaps it can remind companies that this is quite important as well. So that is all I have to share. I hope that promotes some good discussion amongst the panel and the audience. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you. Wonderful presentation. Greatly appreciate that. If you could stop sharing, we'll just go full. Oh, there we are. Oh, hi, everyone. Welcome. We have lots and lots and lots of questions that have come into me. Many have come into the chat room and a couple to the Q&A. So let me just start with this one. And this will go to all three of our panelists because I think each of you will take a slightly different position on it. So this is from Fernando in El Paso. He says, would research on the influence of culture on online reviews count as international word of mouth research? And we'll start with you, Hannah, because you mentioned that topic.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, word of mouth in itself is international because it transcends country borders. And so there are studies that are currently being done in the international marketing literature that shows that there are cultural differences in the way that customers engage with the firm. And so if you're specifically looking at reviews, we can look at different aspects of culture that would either foster providing more reviews online, as well as maybe some institutional regulatory factors that might come into play because this is public information once these reviews go up. So I would definitely say that is an interesting area. There's a lot of work that is done on international review or reviews, online reviews, and that's easy data to obtain, right, Timo? And so I think definitely it is a great avenue for future research.
Timo, would you like to speak to any of the sampling challenges or the data capturing challenges that might go along with that topic of international word of mouth reviews?
Yeah, it's a nice transition because indeed, and I will just do a quick advertisement for IMR because I think 1 or 2 years ago, we published a review paper on electronic word of mouth, and they looked actually at the effect of cultural dimensions, but it's a review paper based on other studies. And I think now there is the potential to actually conduct more rigorous studies at a larger scale, because a few years ago, actually, when you were analyzing text, unstructured data, we were limited by the available language packages. So a lot of studies were actually conducted only in the English-speaking world, based on platforms here. But actually, the language packages that are available are not the limiting factor anymore. So that's at least something that offers a nice avenue for rigorous studies using secondary data from actually different language areas.
Excellent. Fatima, would you like to chime in on that question?
No, I'm fine for now.
Okay, thank you. Excellent, excellent. All right, I'll go to the next one that's on the chat, which is how do we address the issue of the lack of the developed institutions governing platforms, and I would add to that across countries. Who'd like to start with that one? Any volunteers, or I get to call on people? Since I started with Hannah, I'll call.
That's a big question.
Okay, go ahead.
And that's a very daunting task. But yeah, I think the first is just recognizing, I think because the market is just so fast moving. We are now people are just becoming aware of, oh, there is a need for these regulations. And so it definitely is something that needs to be explored, and it's not going to be an easy topic because it does transcend country borders. But definitely, I think if you look at a lot of the UN goals related to digital, the digital world, they are aware that there needs to be sort of a standardized or unified governing institution that looks at these, and because the positive or negative externalities of business operations is there. And so I think we're at a stage where we are just recognizing and kind of tackling it case by case, but I'm not sure how it's going to be done. I don't know if the other two panelists can sort of chime in on this, but they're definitely it's a research question to work towards.
Mind, I compliment your great answer one more time, and I take the methodological part, because I can just repeat one more time. I think even Hannah and we highlighted this need for multi-method approaches, and it has to do also with the broadening the level of unit of analysis. These aspects cannot necessarily be studied with actual data, structured data. I think these are typical phenomena where case study analysis is absolutely appropriate, and there can be proper insights gained from comparing maybe regulatory cases over 10 different countries that faced similar situations, went through different paths, and this might be the appropriate method. And journals should be open to this if there's a match between the phenomenon and the method.
Fatima?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think it's because we don't adopt sufficiently a multidisciplinary view of things. So for example, these institutions, as you say, governing the platform, probably it might come first from a legal perspective or legal person. And then they talk more about privacy concerns, for instance, or these, where does your data go? So I guess we need more marketing people to provide that marketing perspective, from a consumer perspective or end user perspective. Is there a lack of developed institutions? I don't think there's a lack of institutions, probably that they're kind of lagging behind, always chasing what's happening. But there is a good awareness of the need to govern platforms. So I think that the awareness is there. Is the conversation would revolve around how to go about it. So different, hopefully people from different disciplines would have different viewpoints.
Excellent, excellent. And I'll simply add to that, and being an old school international marketing researcher who draws from theory, Timo, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. The institutional economics framework of Douglas North takes into account regulatory differences across countries and how that influences business activity. So that's a nice theoretical framework to throw in there to consider, because much like as Mark had talked about how China had, reactive TikTok was banned in the US, China has banned certain US platforms from entering the Chinese marketplace. And so we do have quite a bit of that going on. Next question, and this is in the Q&A. Can we do secondary data analysis in the case of website traffic? Is it publishable in in case of research with secondary data, I'm not sure what that second part means, but the first question is really, can we use web traffic data that's flowing in from international to do data, and can we publish that? Timo, is the primary secondary data person here. Do you wish to take a stab at that?
In the end, what's the research question, right? And what's the research question? So does the website traffic affect what variable? If there's an interesting research question, that brings me to a good point. If there's an interesting research question, of course, you can pursue this, and then it's a question whether you can obtain that data. I think if it's an interesting research question, you can convince companies actually even to provide that data. Website traffic is not, I think it's not that sensitive of a business information that companies would not give out. The issue with certain operational research questions is that a lot of companies themselves optimize the systems anyways. They run A/B tests, and they are not necessarily interested in the coefficient we find in the meta-analysis, because it does not exactly account for their specific situation. So I talked actually with people that are working for companies that are running digital platforms, and indeed they had trouble to connect with me about these issues, because they are into the self-optimization anyways. So the question is, what kind of general research question do you want to answer with the traffic of, for example, a single website? Unless there was something else on your mind.
I think there'd be a lot of questions that possibly could be answered, right? If you just think about whether or not there are cultural differences in the customer journey, right? Whether there's different response behaviors from traffic from different countries, possibly even device utilization issues across countries. So to Timo's point, I think it'd be really, really important to dig in to understand what that phenomena is, rather than simply the data aspect. Next question, and this goes directly to Timo. What do you mean by value is created by complementers and consumers, but not by the platform company?
All right. So that's more a definitory question. In the end, I should add the word most. The main difference is that the platform company is more a facilitating party or orchestrating party. So the role this company plays is much different. So the platform company itself can have very few resources and actually have no capabilities in what the platform is for. So they, for example, do not offer construction services, but the actual value for the consumers is delivered by those complementers that have the resources and capabilities to provide you construction services. So if you look at it just in a relative term, most of the actual value or value co-creation takes place between those two units, and the platform company is just a facilitator or matchmaker.
So the next question is it kind of builds upon that, but it was directed towards Fatima. Given the variety of digital capability aspects or digital aspects that the firm is using, how do we differentiate across companies in terms of digital marketing capabilities? I think it's kind of asking, what are digital marketing capabilities, and how do we know we're capturing the same thing across companies?
Yeah, sure. Well, the way the survey was run was based on, the profile is supposed to be international business, right? So it has to have some international aspect to it. And the digital marketing capabilities is really to look at, it draws from the dynamic capabilities literature or concept, which is, trying to see, well, how do you use that to really not only use it, but for a certain purpose. For example, improve the relationship with customers, make sure that you're able to update your products, by communicating well with the supplier. And if you look across different firm size, if you like, the small, the medium, and the large, I think the way, obviously, the way different companies would use these digital marketing capabilities would be different depending on their circumstances. But all companies need some form of digital marketing capabilities. And I would also say, digital mindset, that's quite a popular coin term right now. Under having the mindset inside the company means that then people are able to use whatever technology is being offered to them.
Excellent, excellent. And this kind of goes into a one that was directed towards Timo, which is somewhat similar. You had mentioned platforms and the various roles that platforms play. So is there a taxonomy of platforms that would be comparable to sort of the media richness typology that's oftentimes applied within social media that you could share with our audience, or just your thoughts?
I have to say I'm working on it.
To be cited later.
I'm working on this. No, indeed, indeed there are some taxonomies, but typically they come out of related disciplines, and there's no holistic framework so far. So what you can typically distinguish, just to name a few dimensions, but the dimensions are numerous, is the transfer of ownership, because you have online marketplaces, but you also have the sharing economy. Consociality, low or high in that sense, whether you actually interact with people or whether it's purely a digital service. Of course, you have also different ways of payments or pricing, meaning that it's completely market driven. Basically, it's a marketplace, and that's why economists are very interested, or were much earlier interested in digital platforms, or whether these are fixed prices by the platform. Stuff like this. Several dimensions. If you look a little bit in Google, you will find taxonomies from different disciplines, but not a single holistic one.
Excellent. I think just to add on to that, from the user side, I think a theoretical approach would be, again, neighboring disciplines. If you look at the user's gratifications theory, they do a great job in terms of providing sort of a taxonomy of different platforms based, and one of them is being, media richness. So that could be a theory that, you complement in your research when you're looking at the data and trying to figure out the different types of platforms.
Excellent. This next question comes in, and I'm going to pose it to all of you. So I'd ask all of you to think about this, because I think it applies to all. Hannah, you've done some work with secondary data at the global level. Fatima, you've done survey research on this, as well as looking at bibliographic. And then Timo, obviously, you've done a wide variety of research, but you're also focusing a lot on secondary data that can be scraped, et cetera, API. So the question is, what is the role of validity and reliability? And it says of your scales, but I would simply say of your data, in a data-driven world of research. So, so you got the sampling issue, you got the scraped issue, you got all this stuff. So what is really the validity and reliability of what you're studying, given the limitations of the data itself? That's a big question. Who'd like to take the first shot at it? I don't want to push that onto someone.
I don't know if I'm understanding the question right, but was the role of establishing validity and reliability?
I think so. Yeah. What's the role of establishing validity and reliability? Or how confident are you in, when you're pulling this data from another source, that it's actually reliable and valid? I mean, we've seen a lot of papers be retracted in the journals across disciplines. Not that, they would be retracted, but the question is, are these studies something we should be building future research on?
I think that's a great question. Again, kind of what Timo mentioned earlier, if you start with the theory, in terms of validity, are you measuring what you're supposed to be measuring and not just using it because it's available data? And so really just striving to be transparent in the review process as to where the data is from, how it was collected, and how the operationalization fits with the theorization. I think is going to be key. You need to demonstrate that through the review process. I think we've gone back and forth in terms of revision processes where they're saying, you know, the data doesn't fit your theoretical model. And so being able to defend that, and then also making the effort to you know, if it doesn't fit your theory, then what other data, even if it's more difficult to get, what would that look like? And just ensuring transparency and validity all the way is important. I don't know if that answers part of the question, but definitely important.
Fatima, would you like to take?
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, I tend to use already published scales and the ones with high, you know, validity already. So that kind of perhaps solves part of the issue. In terms of whether it applies in different contexts, yeah, that's always, you know, that there are obviously things we can do with numbers to say that, okay, we've addressed it. But of course, you know, the more research, the better, right? The in different contexts, the better. Yeah.
Timo?
Maybe I'm just adding the aspect that probably depends on the target journal. I mean, not truly, but the weight or the way reviewers are looking at those papers will differ. So if you're looking at reliability, and I mentioned the issue of measurement error, or specifically the issue of proxies in other fields than I am, having a proxy that has maybe not the perfect match with the theoretical concept, go through review process much easier. And the way I know I am reviewers, we can be harsher on that. So I really think it depends on whether you're going to a digitally oriented journal or a mainstream journal or an IM journal. And this probably has an effect on your measurement models.
Excellent.
Sorry, and also triangulation, isn't it? Getting multiple sources of data, different levels, you know, managerial to subsidiary or whatever. That can help, of course.
And then finally adding on, if there is a limitation, you know, be transparent. And that would be another avenue for future research that other people can pursue.
Excellent, excellent. Next question is, what is a hyperlocal platform? What is a hyperlocal platform? It just moved. What is a hyperlocal platform that is being used for addressing local markets? Would something like Alibaba be that, or would Alibaba be more of a global platform for a global market?
I'm pretty sure we would not describe Alibaba as hyperlocal.
Yeah.
But at least this comment, so it's maybe not my role to define how hyper platforms are called. It has to do something with the probably geographical scope. But I want to at least add one interesting aspect, because we focus a lot on the negative externalities of digital platforms. But digital platforms typically make a lot of sense when resources and capabilities are dispersed. So the matchmaking makes sense. You don't need a platform for a monopoly, right? So when we talk already about we talked about the digital divide, but also bottom of the pyramid, about countries with weaker institutional environments. Actually, platforms could be a very good tool to innovate and actually contribute to economic growth and solve a few problems, not only economic problems, but even sustainability problems, because they are so efficient. So hyper platforms that were mentioned, I refuse to exactly define them, but I mentioned that platforms can play a role also in emerging markets to the good. And maybe they can learn from our experience, our regulatory requirements also over the last years, and actually make even more out of this.
Yeah, the question was refined to used in India. And so I don't know if I would know of any of those, but the thing that comes to my mind are the hyperlocal platforms that are being developed for microlending.
Yeah, that would be an example.
Yeah, something like that. Next question. Do managers need these days to have a global mindset, a digital mindset, or maybe an agile mindset? On which mindset should they focus? Or another way of putting that might be, what's the proportional mindset that's the best? Fatima, would you like to speak to that?
I love that. Yeah, I think they already have a properly global mindset, really, and digital mindset as well, if they invest in digital resources. But the problem is inside the company, how do you develop that mindset throughout the company, and also, alongside that, the capabilities to go along with it. So I don't think it's probably the leaders themselves they do have, but how do they kind of then, let it go, make it even across the whole organization.
That's a fascinating topic. It reminds me of the market orientation concept and the belief that organizations adopt a marketing orientation and that everyone within the organization needs to adopt it. But I've yet to see a study that has actually asked everyone in the organization. You do see studies where they ask the senior manager, does everyone? And they say yes. But I do wonder if the accounting person has adopted that global mindset, or janitorial services, or even customer service sometimes. So
I wonder if David, you and I worked on a project a couple of years ago where we're looking at interaction orientation on an international setting. And so we were kind of looking at the cross-cultural collaborative orientation within the organization at headquarters. And then we also examined how the subsidiaries, when they interact with their customers, do they have an interaction orientation, and how do those go together? And we didn't really work on a digital mindset or a digital orientation at the time, but that is definitely something that can be looked at, because it's probably a very important capability for firms that are operating today in the global market.
I agree wholeheartedly. Next question. Whether the organic search using keywords leads to website traffic, does keyword affect? I think this is coming in as a potential phenomena to investigate, whether the organic search traffic using keywords leads to the website traffic, or does keyword effectiveness index really play an important role in website visibility? So just continuing that conversation. The next question that had come in earlier deals with this issue of ESG and ESG scores and transparency in the digital age. And particularly, it says, while companies are being required throughout the world to report ESG scores and that's supposed to be said to be transparent, what is the level of validity and reliability that should be placed in those scores, given that they seem to have a political or financial incentive?
So, I mean, I guess another way to look at it is how integrated the ESG is within the company. I think that's kind of the ultimate goal that companies have, is how much integration is not so much ticking all these boxes, but how do you integrate it? So top of mind companies like Unilever, for instance, are usually mentioned as being the very well integrated. Patagonia, another one. So I guess probably the question would be how well integrated, even though companies do report on ESG, but it doesn't mean that it's completely integrated. It might be a bit of greenwashing here and there.
Excellent. The next question goes into, I think, what Timo was alluding to, which is APIs and web scraping. And the question is, given the ease of access to all of this data for everyone, how do I collect data that's going to be unique to publish?
So one thing I would at least mention, it sounds like data is readily available. Some data is readily available for us, but I just want to highlight the current developments with Twitter, where there is this announcement that the Twitter API will be commercialized with $40,000 a month or something like this, basically probably allowing only Stanford and Harvard to use Twitter data in the future. And these sources can come to an end, first of all, and the Twitter of 2013 and Twitter of 2023 are also data points that are by far not comparable anymore, and this also goes with other social media platforms. And even if APIs are actually not easy to access, because back in the days, Twitter also allowed you just a restricted data access of 5,000 tweets a week or something like this. It's a few years back. Web scraping is not always the answer. So there are always legal problems associated with it. So we see a lot of data published. We are being told that data is all around it, is readily accessible. I just want to mention, first of all, again, these data sources can come to an end. They can change in nature, and there are legal conditions that you should definitely check before approaching any of these data sources. Ultimately, you will not publish a paper based on just that data that you scraped or accessed through this API, but it's about combining data sets. So figure out what data you're interested in based on your research question. Probably it's unstructured data, for example, text analysis, but what's the outcome? So probably you are interested in some tangible outcomes, sales data of brands that you can obtain from retail data providers, or maybe even firm performance measures that you can get from CompuStat, for example, just as an example. So it's about combining data sources.
Excellent. I'm going to do this last question, which goes to all three of you. All three of you are experts in the area. Not only do you have tremendous contributions from your own scholarship, but I know you all serve the discipline by reviewing a lot of papers, and we thank you for that. In that context, the question I'm asking is, in this area of digital marketing in a globally connected world, can you think of 2 or 3 common issues that lead to rejection of the manuscripts? So it's just sort of when you're getting these papers in, and you're not only reviewing them, but then you're seeing the reviews of other scholars. And so, without disclosing any specific paper, especially mine that you rejected, could you please speak to sort of those common challenges that just it's going to be a problem for our participants when they submit a paper? We'll start with Hannah, and then go to Fatima, and then we'll round out with Timo.
Right. Well, I think right off the top of my head, I can think of 2 big ones. And the first is going to be, what is the relevance? What is the theoretical relevance? Is this an international marketing topic? And so sometimes I will see a study that comes in with, a bunch of really, really cool data and constructs, but there really just isn't the theoretical support and the theoretical questioning that needs to be there up front, that leads into that cool model. And so really establishing the relevance to the field, the relevance to the topic area, and then also relevance to the journal is very important. The second one I would say is, by the time I get to the end of the paper, I really need to know the why and the relevance for the practitioner as well. So we're not in a vacuum. We might be a little late when trying, the academics might be a little late and trying to play catch up with the practitioner world. But I think we need to really, really strive to show and demonstrate the practical relevance of our work. And so really spending a lot of time on that last section. So the first section of motivating your research theoretically, and then why does this matter in the practitioner world? I think those 2 are very strong things that you need to consider going into journals and hoping for a positive outcome in the review process.
Excellent. Fatima?
Yeah. So I guess one of the things that you have to be careful about is, for example, there are papers that might equate, promotions to marketing or use these terms interchangeably. And I guess there you would say, why didn't you work with a marketing scholar? And then they would have fixed that issue. So a lot of times it's, working with the people from different disciplines, I think can really, really just solve the problem very quickly. So that's one thing, don't say marketing is promotions, for instance, or marketing is advertising. That tends to annoy people in marketing. Anyway, So another thing may be that the literature review is too narrow, so that you're magnifying your gaps in the literature. So you didn't actually discuss this part, which is really relevant, and therefore you managed to find a gap in the literature. Like Hannah said, the so what questions. So that's something that I think all of us have to deal with in a review process. You know, so what? You know, why is your research important? And then sometimes I think for qualitative, because of the multi-method, you know, pressures, you might come up with a small qualitative studies, but you might over exaggerate the importance. If it's a very small sample, I would say, you know, maybe write it more as exploratory part of your of the study rather than kind of over. So it's kind of finding that right balance.
Yeah.
All right. I can agree, of course, with all of these points. So I try to focus on some novel aspects. And I think one thing we mentioned already, validity and reliability. And I see often, either as a reviewer or AE, that reviewers take a more negative stance once they have trouble to actually assess the validity and reliability of the empirical part. So the reporting is just too sloppy, I would say. And you don't want reviewers in that mindset to question whether they can trust your results, because if they cannot trust your results, it will be hard to give you a chance for the R&R. That's one thing. And the other thing is more related to the topic of this webinar, in that sense that nowadays I get manuscript on my desk that are primarily focusing on digital phenomena, but they are for the international marketing review. So we need to find an international angle in there. And a lot of these papers fall short because they don't have either international concepts in their model, or they are not comparing relationships across countries, or they have maybe, and I'm very open to that, country-specific phenomena, let it be cultural phenomena like Guangxi that will be related to digital topics. So if you want to publish exactly on this intersection, make sure you clearly highlight that this is a paper that has an international dimension, either in your model or by having multi-country data sets.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, we are closing in on 2 minutes left, so we are going to wrap this up. I'd like to start by saying thank you to our 3 panelists. It was wonderful to hear from you. I appreciate your time today and you sharing your thoughts. A huge thank you to our attendees who stayed with us throughout the presentations and gave great questions. Absolutely wonderful engagement. I can't stop without saying thank you to Monica, who without Monica's help, trust me, we wouldn't be doing any of this. So a big thank you to Monica at the Texas A&M CIBERs and my co-host Ahmet Kirca. And so I would like to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much for 2 years of great webinars. Ahmet, I'll turn it over to you for closing remarks after you unmute.
Right. Thank you very much, David. It was a great pleasure to work with you and your team at the Texas A&M Cyber. And I think these webinars are moving forward very nicely. And today, we also had a great discussion. I truly enjoyed everything that our panelists said and the great questions that we had, and very useful insights and tips. And some of our doctoral students, some of my doctoral students are actually in the audience, and we're chatting on us on the side and say, oh, this is a great idea. Oh, this is well, yeah, just pick one and focus on it and then listen to everything these guys said and try to apply it. That's how it goes, right? So this was really nice. Thank you so much. And I would like to thank other participants for joining us today. Certainly our panelists who have done a phenomenal job. And well, we're looking forward to seeing you again in one of our events in the future. Thank you.
Thanks and gig 'em, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.